The collapse of hope. The sky was dark, not because it was night, but because the stars themselves seemed to have turned their backs on the planet below. Earth was dying, its last breath a whisper carried across the charred ruins of once thriving cities. Alien ships circled the Earth like vultures, their cold, unfeeling eyes scanning the wreckage of a world they had conquered. Captain Aria stood at the edge of the ruined city, her eyes fixed on the distant horizon. The wind howled around her, carrying with it the scent of destruction. Her hands trembled slightly as she gripped the communication device, listening to the crackling static that echoed in her earpiece. "Captain, there's no more signal from Earth," the voice on the other end of the comm said. It was Lieutenant Garcia, his tone weary, full of the weight of hopelessness that had become their daily reality. "The network's down. The last of the satellites we launched have been destroyed." Aria closed her eyes for a moment, trying to steady her breath. Every part of her screamed to give up. They had fought for so long, and yet it seemed that everything they had done had been in vain. The alien invaders, known as the Zoreth, were merciless. Their ships were too powerful, their technology too advanced. "Keep trying," Aria ordered, her voice firmer than she felt. "There has to be something. We can't just give up." She wasn't sure who she was trying to convince more, Garcia or herself. The city behind her was a ghost town, its buildings reduced to rubble. Once, this had been a bustling metropolis, filled with life and energy. Now, it was a graveyard, haunted by the memories of those who had fought and died to protect it. The streets were littered with the remnants of the war, the broken bodies of human soldiers, and the scorched wrecks of alien machines that had once rained destruction down upon the helpless citizens. Aria had seen it all. She had witnessed the Zoreth's invasion firsthand. She had watched as the alien forces systematically wiped out entire colonies, cities, and military outposts. The last remaining human resistance had retreated to this city, hoping to regroup and find a way to strike back, but their chances were growing slimmer by the day. The sound of footsteps behind her pulled Aria from her thoughts. She turned to see Sergeant Mack approaching, his face grim. He didn't need to say anything. The look in his eyes said it all. "We're losing the fight, Captain," Mack said, his voice low, almost defeated. "Our supplies are running out. We've got no backup, and the Zoreth are getting closer every hour." Aria's heart sank. She had known this was coming. The resistance had been stretched thin for weeks now, with no reinforcements, no new supplies. The aliens were relentless, their ships appearing from the shadows of space like ghosts. The humans' only advantage had been their ability to hide, to fight from the shadows. But now, even that was fading. "We need to hold on," Aria said, trying to keep the desperation out of her voice. "Earth has to hear us. There has to be a way." But even as she spoke, Aria knew the truth. The Earth they had once known, the world they had fought so hard to protect, was slipping away. There were no more allies coming, no more miracles. They were alone. Suddenly, a blip on her radar caught her attention. It was faint, but it was there, a signal, an unknown transmission coming from the deep within the Zoreth-controlled territory. Aria's breath caught in her chest. Could this be a sign? A last-ditch effort from Earth, or was it just another alien trick? Her hands moved quickly to analyze the transmission, her fingers shaking slightly as she keyed in the coordinates. It was coming from a location just outside their defenses, a place no human could possibly reach without drawing the full attention of the Zoreth. This can't be real," she muttered to herself. She adjusted the settings on her device, confirming the signal was coming from Earth. A beacon. A message from humanity itself. Garcia's voice crackled through the comms once again. "Captain, what is it?" "Hold on," Aria said, her voice trembling slightly as she stared at the screen. This might be the break we've been waiting for." The signal wasn't strong, but it was clear. It was a human transmission, unmistakably Earth's technology. For a moment, Aria allowed herself to believe. Could humanity still be out there, watching, waiting? Were they sending help? Or was this some kind of trick? Was it too late for them? Captain, Garcia's voice came through again, this time tinged with fear. Whatever it is, we need to act fast. The Zorath are closing in. The comms went silent for a moment, and Arya felt the weight of the situation. This was the moment where everything would change. This signal, if it was real, was humanity's last hope. With a deep breath, Arya turned back toward her team. She couldn't let them fall into despair. They had one chance left, and she was going to take it. "Prepare yourselves," she said, her voice stronger now, filled with a renewed sense of purpose. "We're going after that signal. If it's from Earth, we're going to find out what it means. If there's any hope left, we're going to grab it." As Arya led her team into the dark, alien-controlled city, she couldn't help but feel a tiny spark of hope light up in her chest. It was a faint feeling, barely more than a whisper, but it was there. Humanity might have lost so much, but as long as they kept fighting, they hadn't lost everything. The last hope. The sound of distant alien ships echoed through the ruined streets. The sky above was filled with their cold, unblinking eyes, hungry, searching, never resting. Arya could hear them, even though they were far away. They were always there, hovering like vultures. "Captain, you're sure about this?" Lieutenant Garcia's voice broke through the quiet, a sense of unease hanging in the air. They had just finished a long, exhausting journey across the city's ruined outskirts. With each step, the weight of their mission grew heavier. The further they traveled, the more they entered the heart of the alien territory. "We have to be sure," Arya replied firmly. She tried to ignore the uncertainty creeping in. She couldn't afford to show fear. Not now. Not when everything depended on this mission. The signal's coming from that old facility. It's our only chance. The team had been pushing forward for hours, avoiding alien patrols and keeping to the shadows. Their objective was simple: find the source of the transmission and discover what it meant. Could it be from Earth? Could humanity still have the strength to fight back? The team moved in silence, staying close to the crumbled walls of abandoned buildings. It had been days since they'd seen any signs of life. Human life. That is, the few survivors they had encountered were few and far between, and the Zorath had already begun scouring the area for stragglers. As they neared the edge of the Zorath-controlled zone, Arya's heart raced. The facility they were headed for had once been a hub for Earth's scientific advancements, research, technology, and military strategies, all stored within its walls. But now, it was nothing but a forgotten relic, a place the Zorath had long since abandoned. "It's quiet," Sergeant Mack observed, scanning the area with his rifle. "Too quiet." "I don't like it either," Arya said, her hand resting on the hilt of her blade. The tension was thick, as if the air itself was holding its breath. Despite the eerie stillness, the facility loomed ahead. The broken sign at the entrance hung crookedly, as if it had been there for centuries. The lights were out, and the massive gates that had once controlled access were now a pile of twisted metal. "We need to get inside," Arya ordered. "Let's move." The team quickly approached the facility's entrance, careful not to make any noise. Mack and Garcia kept watch while Arya and a few others went to work on the security system. It had been years since they had seen Earth technology in action, but the team had learned quickly to adapt to their surroundings. It wasn't much, but it was enough. With a quiet hum, the facility's doors slowly creaked open, revealing the dark interior. Inside, the air was thick with dust. The halls were empty, save for the scattered remains of broken equipment and old files. The place felt abandoned, yet there was a strange energy in the air, like something was waiting, just out of sight. "This place gives me the creeps," Garcia muttered as he moved forward. "Like we're walking into a trap." Arya ignored him. She wasn't going to let fear get the better of her. They had come this far, and they were going to find out who or what had sent the signal. The stakes were too high. "Stay sharp," she said. We don't know what's here. The team moved deeper into the facility, navigating through the maze of darkened corridors. As they passed through what appeared to be a storage room, something caught Aria's eye. It was a terminal, a dusty old console that had been left running. Its screen flickered weakly, displaying a message in broken text. "This is it," Aria said, her voice tinged with a mix of excitement and dread. She rushed the terminal, fingers flying over the keys, trying to access the data. It took a few moments, but finally the screen blinked to life. "Captain, this is..." Garcia started, but his voice trailed off. The message on the screen was clear now. "Hail PUS. The ZORATH will win. Only you can stop them." The word sent a chill through Aria's bones. It was a cry for help, desperate and raw. The message was unmistakably human. But who had sent it? And why hadn't they heard from Earth sooner? Aria swallowed hard, trying to keep her focus. "We need to find out more. If Earth is still out there, we can't waste any more time." But as she scrolled through the terminal's files, something didn't sit right with her. The more she read, the more it seemed like the message had been sent from someone. Someone who had been trapped, who had been watching as the Zorath slowly crushed their world. "Captain, we're not alone," Max said, his voice tight with concern. He looked over his shoulder toward the entrance. Aria turned, her heart pounding in her chest. The air had changed. There was a shift in the atmosphere, a pressure that weighed down on her, like the facility itself was alive and watching them. She heard footsteps, not the quiet shuffle of a human, but the heavy, metallic clank of alien boots. "They know we're here," she said, her voice low. "We need to move now." With urgency, the team began to retreat, but the sound of the alien soldiers grew louder, closer. Aria's thoughts raced. The Zorath were closing in on them. The message from Earth, the only hope they had left, might be lost in the chaos of their escape. The door they had entered through slammed shut, trapping them inside. The Zorath had found them. The Zorath's trap. The sound of heavy, mechanical footsteps echoed through the dark, abandoned corridors of the facility. Aria's heart raced as she turned to her team, their eyes wide with fear. The Zorath were close, their presence suffocating, like a shadow creeping ever closer. "We need to move fast," she whispered, her voice steady despite the rising panic in her chest. "Head to the back exit. Now." The team quickly fell into formation, weapons raised, ready for whatever the Zorath would throw at them. But the longer they stayed in the facility, the more Aria could feel the walls closing in. Every creak of the floor, every flicker of light made her jump. The place had become a maze of cold, sterile halls, and she had no idea where the exit was anymore. The terminal they'd just accessed had provided some answers, but also raised more questions. Who had sent the distress signal? Was it really from Earth? And if so, why hadn't they heard from humanity sooner? The Zorath knew the humans were here. It was only a matter of time before they found them. "Captain," Garcia said in a low voice, his eyes scanning the corridors. "We can't just run. We need a plan." Aria nodded. He was right. Running blindly wasn't going to help them. The Zorath had the upper hand in terms of technology, and their numbers were overwhelming. If they were going to get out of here alive, they needed to outsmart them. "We'll set a trap," Aria said, her mind racing. "We'll lure them into the lower level of the facility and lock them in. It's our only chance." The team quickly moved to the lower level, navigating through darkened hallways. As they descended deeper into the facility, the temperature seemed to drop. The air grew cold and heavy, and Aria could feel the weight of their mission pressing down on them. Time was running out. The Zorath were closer now, and she had no idea how much longer they had. "We need to act fast," Max said, his voice tense. "I'm not liking how this is going down, Captain." "They're smart. They'll catch on quick." Aria stopped in front of a large, reinforced door. This would be the perfect place to trap the Zorath. If they could get them inside, they could lock the door behind them and buy themselves some time. "Everyone, get into position," she ordered. "We're going to make a stand." The team took their positions, each member hiding behind large crates and machinery, waiting for the Zoreth to walk into their trap. Aria's mind raced, trying to anticipate every possible outcome. She couldn't let fear take over. Not now. Minutes passed, feeling like hours. The sound of the Zoreth's boots grew louder with every second, each step bringing them closer. Aria's fingers tightened around her weapon as she steeled herself for what was to come. Suddenly, the door to the lower level slammed open. The Zoreth had arrived. They were larger than human soldiers, twice the size, with sleek, armored bodies that seemed to blend into the darkness. Their eyes glowed an eerie, sickly green as they stepped into the room, their weapons ready. Aria could hear their breathing, slow and calculated, as they scanned the area for any signs of movement. They were intelligent, dangerous creatures, and they were about to fall into the trap. Aria signaled to Garcia. Now. With a sharp click, the trap was sprung. The lower-level doors slammed shut with a thunderous bang, trapping the Zoreth inside. For a moment, the team stood frozen, watching as the alien soldiers banged against the reinforced door, their fists pounding like thunder. But the Zoreth weren't going to be held for long. "Get to the control panel," Aria shouted. "We need to keep them locked in." Now. Garcia rushed to the control panel, fingers flying over the buttons. The sound of the Zoreth's pounding grew louder, more frantic. The door was starting to bend under the pressure. Aria could feel the fear creeping up again, but she fought it down. This wasn't the time for panic. "Come on, Garcia," she muttered under her breath. With a final press of a button, the door locked with a loud mechanical click. The Zoreth stopped pounding, their movements stilling for a moment. Aria didn't let herself breathe a sigh of relief just yet. They had bought themselves a little time, but not much. "Let's move," she said. "We don't have long." The team quickly made their way through the facility, hoping to find more answers before the Zoreth broke free. But the deeper they went, the more they discovered. The facility was no longer just a trap for the humans. It was a place of secrets, and the Zoreth were hiding something even more dangerous. As they entered a new room, the team's breath caught in their throats. There on the walls were ancient maps and strange symbols. But it wasn't just that. In the center of the room stood a massive, glowing device, something Aria had never seen before. "What is that?" Garcia asked, awe and fear in his voice. Aria stepped forward cautiously, inspecting the device. It looked like some kind of weapon. Its energy output was staggering, almost overwhelming. "We have to shut this down," Aria said. But as she approached, a loud screeching sound echoed from behind them. The Zoreth had broken free, and now they were coming for them. "Move," Aria shouted. The team turned, running as fast as they could through the maze-like halls of the facility, but the Zoreth were closing in. The trap had worked for now, but they were far from safe. They had to keep moving, keep fighting. And the secrets of this place, the Zoreth's true plans, were still out there, waiting to be uncovered. The Zoreth's secret weapon. The hallways were narrow and winding, filled with the smell of rust and decay. Aria's team moved quickly, their footsteps echoing off the metal walls. They had temporarily disabled the Zoreth, but they knew it wouldn't last. Time was slipping away, and the deeper they ventured into the facility, the more ominous the place became. The strange device they had found earlier still loomed in their minds. It was too large to be a simple weapon, yet its energy output suggested it could destroy entire cities if activated. Aria could feel the weight of its power as they approached, her mind racing with the implications. If the Zoreth were using it for something more than just a military advantage, then humanity was facing a threat beyond anything they had imagined. "We need to disable it," Aria said, her voice tight with urgency. She had no idea what the device could do, but she wasn't about to leave it operational, especially with the Zoreth on their heels. "Captain," I don't think we can just turn it off, Garcia replied, his tone filled with doubt. This thing's unlike anything we've ever seen before. I know, Arya muttered, glancing over at the glowing energy core embedded within the device. It pulsed with an eerie light, casting long shadows across the room. But we have to try. The team stopped at the entrance to a control room. The door was slightly ajar, and Arya could see faint shadows moving inside. The Zorath had arrived. They weren't going to make it out of this facility without a fight. Prepare for contact, Arya ordered, signaling for her team to get into position. They silently fanned out, taking cover behind walls and crates. The sound of heavy footsteps approached from within the room, the Zorath soldiers moving with their signature, mechanical precision. Arya's heart pounded in her chest. This was it, the moment they had been running toward. The team had no choice but to face the Zorath head-on. If they wanted to shut down the device and save humanity, they would have to fight for their lives. Stay close, Arya whispered. She could feel the tension in the air, like the calm before the storm. The Zorath had already locked onto their location, and they were moving in fast. As the first Zorath soldier appeared around the corner, the team opened fire. The shots rang out, and the Zorath soldier staggered back, its thick armor absorbing the impact. But they didn't stop. The Zorath charged forward, their weapons flashing as they returned fire. The team dove for cover, narrowly avoiding a blast that sent debris flying. Move, 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 Arya shouted, her voice barely heard over the deafening gunfire. The team scrambled through the chaos. Using every skill, they had to fight off the Zorath soldiers. They had no choice but to push forward, deeper into the facility. As they neared the control room, Arya saw the flicker of movement in the shadows. Something was watching them. Something far more dangerous than the Zorath soldiers. Don't stop, she yelled, adrenaline coursing through her veins. Get to the control room now. They burst into the control room, weapons at the ready. But the sight that greeted them froze them in their tracks. At the center of the room was a massive Zorath warlord, its towering frame looming over a bank of consoles. Its eyes glowed with an unnatural intensity, and its claws scraped across the floor as it turned to face them. You should not have come here, humans, the warlord's voice rumbled, deep and guttural. You are too late. The device is activated. Your fate is sealed. Arya's heart sank. They had no time. The Zorath had already set their plan in motion, and humanity's last hope was slipping through their fingers. Get ready, she shouted, signaling her team to open fire. The warlord charged, its massive form smashing through the control room's consoles. The team fired, but their weapons barely made a dent in its thick armor. It swung its claws, knocking several of the team members to the ground. Captain, Garcia shouted, struggling to get to his feet. We can't take it down like this. Keep shooting, Arya yelled, her eyes fixed on the warlord. She had no choice but to hold her ground. If they didn't stop this creature, humanity was done for. In the chaos, Arya spotted a terminal off to the side. It was connected to the device in the main chamber. If she could get to it, she might be able to override the system and deactivate the weapon before it was too late. With a burst of energy, Arya sprinted across the room, dodging the warlord's strikes as she moved. The air was thick with the smell of burnt metal and the sound of clashing weapons. She reached the terminal, her hands flying over the controls, trying to make sense of the alien system. The warlord turned toward her, letting out a roar of fury as it stalked forward. It was almost upon her when the terminal finally lit up with a response. The countdown for the device had begun. Got it, Arya shouted, her heart racing. I'm shutting it down. The warlord let out an earth-shattering roar, its massive form charging toward her with terrifying speed. But Arya didn't hesitate. She pressed the final command on the terminal, and the countdown halted. The device stopped glowing, and the eerie hum that had filled the facility faded into silence. For a moment, the world seemed to stop. The The Zorath warlord halted in its tracks, its glowing eyes flickering in disbelief. The team watched, stunned, as the warlord took a step back, its movements sluggish and confused. Aria's breath caught in her throat. They had done it. They had stopped the weapon. But the battle wasn't over, not by a long shot. The Zorath warlord, now enraged, charged forward one last time. But before it could strike, the ceiling above them rumbled. The entire facility shook, and a massive explosion echoed from somewhere deep inside the structure. The Zorath's secret weapon had been destroyed, along with everything around it. "Run," Aria shouted, grabbing Garcia by the arm. The team had no choice but to flee. The facility was collapsing, and they needed to escape before it all came crashing down. The final escape had begun, and they were the only ones left to stop the Zorath from conquering Earth. The final countdown. The ground trembled beneath their feet as the team sprinted through the twisting corridors of the facility. Every step they took echoed in the chaos that surrounded them. The explosion that had destroyed the Zorath's secret weapon had left the facility in ruins, but it had also triggered a series of catastrophic events. The countdown was now a reality. Everything was falling apart. Aria's mind raced. They had disabled the weapon, but the facility was collapsing, and time was running out. The Zorath's plan had already been set in motion, and with every passing second, the chances of stopping them grew slimmer. They had to escape, or all would be lost. "Move. Keep moving," Aria yelled, leading her team toward the exit. The sound of collapsing metal and explosions filled the air. The walls shook violently, and sparks flew from broken wires. The Zorath warlord had been momentarily incapacitated, but it was only a matter of time before it recovered, and came after them. They reached a narrow corridor, one that led to the outermost part of the facility, where they hoped they could escape before it was too late. But as they turned the corner, they encountered a horrifying sight. More Zorath soldiers. It was a trap. "They're waiting for us," Garcia said, his voice grim. He raised his weapon, but the team knew they wouldn't be able to fight their way out this time. There were too many of them, and the facility was quickly becoming unstable. "Don't stop," Aria shouted, her pulse racing. "We've got one shot at this." She led the team into the fray, firing her weapon and taking down as many of the Zorath soldiers as she could. But the sheer number of enemies forced them back. The hallway was a war zone, filled with gunfire and explosions. Each step forward felt like an eternity. "We need to find a way out," shouted Lynn, one of Aria's team members. "The Zorath are everywhere." Aria's mind whirled. They had no time for tactics, no time for strategy. The facility was collapsing. The countdown had to be close to zero. It was now or never. Suddenly, she spotted a small door to the side, hidden behind a stack of debris. It was a maintenance hatch, one that might lead to an escape tunnel. Her heart leaped. "Over there," she yelled, pointing toward the hatch. "That's our way out." The team turned and charged toward the door, pushing through the gunfire and explosions. As they neared the hatch, one of the Zorath soldiers threw a grenade. It rolled toward them with terrifying speed. Aria's eyes widened. Time seemed to slow as the grenade came closer. "Get down," she screamed, diving to the floor. The explosion shook the ground, knocking them off their feet. The blast sent debris flying, and the entire hallway seemed to buckle under the pressure. Dust filled the air, making it nearly impossible to see. The team scrambled to get up, their limbs heavy from the shock. "Are you okay?" Garcia asked, his voice strained. "I'm fine," Aria responded, shaking the dust from her hair. "But we don't have much time. Let's move." They reached the maintenance hatch and forced it open, just as the walls around them began to crack and collapse. Beyond the hatch was a dark tunnel, stretching into the unknown. The air inside was thick with the smell of metal and burning fuel, but it was their only chance. The team poured into the tunnel, their footsteps quick and urgent. They could hear the roar of the Zorath warlord in the distance, its massive form pushing through the wreckage of the facility. They had no time to waste. The tunnel was their last hope. As they ran, the walls of the facility continued to shake, and the sound of explosions echoed through the corridor. Aria's mind raced. They had come so far, and yet the hardest part was still ahead of them. "Stay close," she ordered, her voice tight with the weight of responsibility. "We're not out of the woods yet." The tunnel seemed endless. Every turn, every twist brought them deeper into the unknown. But Aria didn't stop. She couldn't stop. Humanity's future depended on what happened next. As they reached the end of the tunnel, they were met with the open sky. The stars above them were a stark contrast to the hell they had just left behind. But their relief was short-lived. The Zorath warlord had found them, and the battle for humanity's survival was about to reach its climax. The countdown was nearing 0. The fate of Earth rested in their hands. The last stand. The ground beneath them shook violently as the team emerged from the tunnel into the open air. The night sky was dotted with stars, but the distant sound of explosions and the roar of collapsing structures reminded them that the Zorath were still close behind. The escape had only bought them moments of safety, and those moments were quickly slipping away. Aria looked ahead, her heart pounding. They had made it out of the facility, but the Zorath warlord had tracked them down. It was relentless, a towering, unstoppable force, and it wouldn't stop until they were all dead. If they couldn't stop it now, the fate of humanity was sealed. "We need to make a stand," Aria said, her voice grim but determined. "We don't have time to run anymore." Garcia nodded. "If we don't stop the warlord here, it's over. We have to end it." But the question was, how? The Zorath warlord was far too powerful. Their weapons had barely made a dent in it earlier. Yet Aria knew they couldn't afford to let fear control them now. They were humanity's last line of defense. "We fight," Aria said, her eyes narrowing as she scanned their surroundings. "We'll use everything we have left." The team quickly took cover behind scattered wreckage, weapons raised, but their movements were slow and careful. They could feel the Zorath's presence before they saw it. The ground trembled as the warlord's massive form emerged from the shadows, its glowing eyes fixated on them. It was even larger than they had remembered, its armored body nearly indestructible. The Zorath warlord snarled, its claws scraping the ground as it advanced toward them. Its voice boomed, sending shivers down their spines. "You cannot defeat me. Your world will burn." Aria steadied her breath. "We'll see about that." The team opened fire, but the shots seemed useless, barely making a dent in the warlord's thick armor. It retaliated with a roar, its massive fists crashing into the ground, sending shockwaves that knocked the team off their feet. The force was so strong that the ground beneath them cracked open, creating a small chasm. "Stay on your feet," Aria shouted, struggling to rise. But the Zorath didn't stop. It advanced, each step shaking the earth beneath them. The team fired again, their weapons blazing with fury, but they were running out of time. The Zorath warlord was too powerful, and their ammunition was dwindling. "This isn't working," Garcia shouted, ducking behind a piece of debris as another blast from the warlord's energy weapon tore through the air. "We need to get to its core," Aria realized. If they could destroy the warlord's power source, it would all be over. But the warlord was far too strong, and the core was buried deep inside its chest. "We can't get close enough," Lynn shouted, barely avoiding another blast. "It's too dangerous." But Aria didn't hesitate. She had no choice. This was humanity's final chance. "Cover me," she ordered. Without waiting for a response, she broke cover and sprinted toward the warlord, dodging the blasts as best as she could. Her heart raced, each step bringing her closer to the battle's climax. The Zorath warlord roared in fury, swinging its enormous claw at her. But Aria was faster. She ducked and rolled, her fingers grazing the warlord's thick armor as she reached the side of its massive body. Her breath came in shallow gasps, and the adrenaline surged through her veins. She knew she couldn't stop now. With a swift movement, she activated a small explosive charge that she had kept hidden in her suit. She planted it onto the warlord's exposed side, just inches from the energy core. As she sprinted back to safety, she shouted, "Get back. It's going to explode." The team turned and ran, their footsteps pounding the ground as they sought shelter behind the nearest rocks and debris. The Zorath warlord roared in defiance, its eyes glowing bright with rage, but it was too late. The explosive charge detonated with a deafening blast, the shockwave knocking them all to the ground. The ground beneath them shook violently as the warlord staggered, its massive frame swaying as the core inside it began to overheat. Then, with an earth-shattering explosion, the warlord's body erupted in a brilliant flash of light, its armor disintegrating as the energy within it was unleashed. Arya shielded her eyes as the explosion sent debris flying in every direction. For a moment, everything was silent. The dust hung in the air, thick and suffocating. The team slowly rose to their feet, unsure of what they had just witnessed. Had they succeeded? As the dust began to settle, they saw the remains of the Zorath warlord, charred and twisted metal, nothing more than a smoldering heap. The ground around them was torn apart, the landscape forever changed by the explosion. But the warlord was no more. Did we do it? Lynn asked, her voice trembling with disbelief. Arya nodded slowly, her heart still racing. It's over. We stopped it. The team stood there for a moment, letting the reality of their victory sink in. They had faced the impossible, and against all odds, they had triumphed. But they knew this was only the beginning. The Zorath were still out there, and humanity's battle for survival was far from over. But for the first time in a long while, Arya allowed herself a moment of peace. They had won. They had saved humanity. And with that, they would fight on. The dawn of a new hope. The sun began to rise over the horizon, casting a pale light on the charred remains of the battlefield. Arya and her team stood in the quiet aftermath, their bodies bruised and their energy spent. The Zorath warlord was gone, its once mighty frame reduced to rubble. Yet, despite the exhaustion and the destruction around them, a strange sense of calm settled over the team. They had done it. They had saved humanity. Arya took a deep breath, her gaze shifting from the ruined warlord to the team standing beside her. Garcia, Lynn, and the others were silent, each of them processing the victory in their own way. The battlefield was littered with the remnants of war, but the light of a new day seemed to offer a sense of renewal. The Zorath's grip on Earth was broken, and the future, though uncertain, was no longer shrouded in darkness. "We did it," Lynn said softly, her voice filled with awe. She turned to Arya. "You led us through this. We wouldn't have made it without you." Arya's heart swelled with pride, but she didn't allow herself to linger on the praise. There was no time for that. The battle was over, but the war wasn't won. The Zorath were still out there, scattered across the galaxy. The victory was important, but it was just one piece of a much larger puzzle. "We fought well," Arya said, her voice steady but full of conviction. "But this isn't the end. It's just the beginning." "Beginning of what?" Garcia asked, his tone skeptical. "We've just destroyed their strongest weapon. Doesn't that mean we've won?" Arya turned to him, her expression serious. "The Zorath are a force to be reckoned with. This won't stop them. They'll regroup, they'll adapt, and they'll come back. We have to be ready." "We'll be ready," Garcia replied. "We'll make sure humanity is ready." As the team gathered their equipment and began their journey toward the nearest evacuation point, Arya's mind raced. The victory against the warlord had been monumental, but they had lost so much in the process. The Zorath had destroyed entire cities, killed millions, and their influence stretched across the stars. Humanity had won this battle, but the war was far from over. In the distance, Arya could see the remains of a small human fleet, its ships damaged but still intact. It was a reminder of the cost of war, the lives lost, the destruction caused. But it was also a symbol of hope. Humanity's resilience, its ability to rise from the ashes, had proven itself once again. The fleet might have been small, but it was still standing. And with it stood the hopes of 1,000 worlds. "We've got a lot of rebuilding to do," Arya murmured to herself, her voice carrying the weight of everything that had happened. "But we'll make it. We always do." As they reached the fleet, the crew of the ships greeted them with cheers and applause. They had all heard of the team's success, and their spirits were lifted by the news of the warlord's defeat. It wasn't just the victory they were celebrating. It was the promise of a future where humanity could thrive once again. "We've lost a lot," Arya said to the gathered crew, her voice firm but compassionate. "But we haven't lost everything. The Zorath may have broken us, but they've never broken our will. We're still here, and we'll fight until the very end." The crew nodded, their faces determined. They were soldiers, survivors, and they would stand by humanity's side as long as it took. The battle was far from over, but now they had a chance. "We'll rebuild," Arya continued, her words ringing out to the group. "And next time, we'll be stronger. Next time, we'll win for good." With that, the team climbed aboard the ships, the hum of engines starting up filling the air. As they took off into the stars, Arya couldn't help but feel a sense of hope for the first time in what seemed like forever. They had survived the worst of the storm. Now, they would rise again. In the distance, the earth lay below them, scared but not defeated. It was a world that had been tested, but one that would not bow. And as the ships soared toward their next mission, Arya knew that humanity would never give up, no matter how dire the situation. The journey was far from over, but they had one thing the Zorath would never understand: hope. The hope that fueled them, the hope that would drive them to protect their world, their future, and everything they had fought for. And with that hope, they would face whatever came next.